Beautiful podcast seeks to offer a beautiful, though never fluffy lens through which to view the tougher aspects in our birth charts. The goal is to interview people who are working their way through that. Okay, so super quick, I'm just going to share my screen for the surprise. Okay, it's a good surprise. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open Firefox up and we are going to look up what your beautiful name means. Just because I feel like I bet you probably agree, but it really tells you something about the person, and like the virtues, the specialties that they have. Okay. Follower of Dionysus. Okay, so Denise is a feminine name, French and Greek origins, feminine version of Dennis, follower of Dionysus, Greek mythology, Dionysus. Bacchus is known as the god of wine, fruit, and vegetation. Oh,
Kind of a Jupiter character, no?
I don't know very much about Dionysus. What do you know about Dionysus?
It's it's the god of wine. That's how I've always known it's the god of wine, but it gives me Jupiter vibes because it's wine.
Okay, true. That's a good
Yeah,
point.
yeah,
That's really interesting, considering what we were saying
yeah,
about Pisces and then Sag also.
yeah.
And I actually love the part that it says about vegetation because yeah, that feeling of abundance and also health and prosperity.
Yeah, it gives prosperity vibes. Yeah, yeah,
Well, I'm an only child and I was born in Mexico to my mom, obviously. And my dad, he's he was from the US, but he's also Mexican American, and my mom's Mexican. And my dad was a Vietnam veteran, and he was much older than my mom. Well, not 9 years is, in my opinion, much older, but yeah. And my mom had me a little older in life, so she really wanted a child, and I was born. But there was a lot of struggles with my dad because he was a veteran and he struggled with PTSD because he, went to a war that was really bad. And not only did he go to a war, I mean, there's no good wars, obviously, right? But my dad was a hippie, so I have no idea. And he, like, poor guy, he really struggled with guilt, I think, with what he went through and the things that he did. So there's all of that background stuff going on in my childhood. And yeah, like I have no other siblings. It was just me and my mom, my grandma, and my dad. And we kind of split my childhood between Mexico. I live right on the border between Mexico and Texas. So I was always going back and forth. And I also have a bit of that, as all immigrant kids do. Like, I'm not Mexican enough for my Mexican friends or family, and I'm not American enough for my American friends and family. So there's all of that going on too. All of that is part of my identity and my story. And I don't know, it means a lot to me to be doing astrology and talking about this as a Mexican American person, because there aren't a lot of people who are Mexican who are speaking in English, right? And there's a lot of Mexican American people in the US. So I'm just like, now you guys have an astrologer. So that's part of the reason why I do it, and part of the reason why I called my channel Puro Astrology, like incorporated that Spanish word so that people would know that I'm Mexican.
And I think it adds this beautiful layer to the story. Because even what your father has gone through, it sounds so Mars Neptune.
Ruby, I barely realized that like a few days ago. It finally occurred to me. I was like, because the warrior spirit is within me, Ruby. Like, I'm not, like, I'm really nice and I'm everything, but if it's going down, Ruby, I'm taking off my earrings and I'm fighting, like I can be an aggressive person when it's necessary. Like, I will not shrink back from a fight. Um, but and I was just like, and I never associated my dad with being a warrior, which is ridiculous because he was a Marine, but because like I saw, what was left of him after the war, so I never associated him with being like this like Marine, right? He wasn't those types of veterans that are like proud of their service or anything. Like my dad would not talk about it. You wouldn't have known that about him if you didn't know. So I was like, wait a second. I was like, that is so Mars Neptune. Like Mars in Aries is the warrior, the fighter, the soldier, which was what he was. But the Neptune was my dad was a Venus in Pisces. So he was a sensitive soul. And yeah, like I have that inside of me because of him, which makes sense. It's very beautiful to see how our family imprints astrologically, and there's so many connections there, and I can't believe it took me this long to see that. And you in a second you were just like, hey, that's Mars Neptune. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's the funny thing too. Like, yeah, because Neptune clouds so many things too, and
Mm-hmm.
I feel you on that. Like our own stories. Like I think I read somewhere, heard from someone, they're like, if you're an astrologer, it doesn't matter. You just go get your chart read by other people, okay? Because you're not gonna see anything that you need to see. It's what others
Yeah.
are gonna see, What you were saying about Mars in Aries, that's the born warrior, born fighter. But then I was also thinking about Sag and that arch, or
Mm.
is that what you call it?
The archer, yeah, the what is it called? The
Archer.
bow, yeah, the bow.
Bow and arrow. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and then that also being, I guess, more of like an internal warrior or the self warrior journeying through their own journey, navigating. And
yeah.
again, it's Jupiter ruled. Um, but something else I was also thinking about, um, oh, I got too excited again. That was a good one. Yes, is about karma. What you were saying about the family that you're born into and how it's so interesting, these sort of imprints. Um, so with the meditation center that I go to, some of the knowledge that has been shared about those sort of dynamics are that it really is just karma, the karma of relationship, um, the souls that we enter like our families into. Um, they're souls that we have a lot of karma with, whether that be really, really wonderful, maybe not so wonderful, whatever it is. There's just been a lot of relating to each other and a lot of imprints have been placed on us because
Mm.
of all of that relating with each other. So that makes sense that there'd be Mars, Neptune stuff happening for the father and also for the daughter. Mm.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting, Ruby, that you mentioned that. And it's funny because I don't have a strong, like, a strong moon in the traditional sense. Like, my moon is in Sagittarius. That is quincunx to Cancer, which is the ruler of the moon, right? It's not even in a water sign. Like, I'm a Sagittarius. I run from feelings. I'm just like, no, let's just be positive. Let's just make jokes. Like that's my inclination, right? And I never had, maybe that's why I hadn't thought of the Mars Neptune. I don't think about history. I don't think about genealogy, anything like that. I like to think that I'm my own man, I'm my own person and I was just placed here and I could just be free. That's what I always thought. And through all of the Cancer people in my life and just like forcing me to see that, you're not just your own person who was placed here, there's these connections and this is comes natural to you as such a dominant Cancer person. The moon is such an important part of your chart and then it rules two planets. So like that is more integral to who you are. And for me, it's something that I've had to learn the importance of where we come from. And yeah, maybe that's going to be a part of my healing journey is like acknowledging that and like it's a huge thing that I hadn't noticed about myself. So now with that information, I'm just very curious about how things are going to evolve for me from this point forward because these are just like new revelations. And even you coming into my life and talking to me about these things, everything is very synchronistic and meaningful. So talking about karma, these are all things that I had not thought about. Like, but now I'm seeing these things and now I'm curious about, like, is there something that I have to finish that, like, my dad lived all of his life with this great suffering because of his role in war, for example. And it's like, what can I do to maybe alleviate some of that, or work on the things that he wasn't able to work on? Like, maybe that could be part of my job here in my life. So who knows? I don't know.
It's also funny because I always thought Sag would be such an awesome place for the moon because you're like happy go lucky
Oh
and
yeah, it is happy go lucky, but sometimes things are sad, Ruby. And sometimes you shouldn't make a joke about that. And my inclination is like, why would you want to be sad? Just make a joke about it. But like, some things are heavy, and maybe there is a place for humor, once you've processed the emotion, maybe. But with Sagittarius moon, there's very much like, no, no, there's no emotion. Let's just get over it. Like, everything's fine. Let's go on an adventure. Like, and that has its positives, but it definitely has its negatives.
wow, wow. And then I also think about that Sag connection. Okay, of course, it's not to say that Sag rules the ninth house, but that connection
There's an
between,
association, yeah.
thank you, yes, and Jupiter. So, like, there, like it would feel like there's some sort of place for spirituality or religiosity in the life of someone who has a moon in Sag, especially for someone like you who has such strong Sagittarian like vibes. Um,
Mhm.
but then you also have the depth of the Scorpio. Like in your channel, you said that you've got Venus in Scorpio.
Yeah.
And then along with that, all of the Saturnian elements, because Saturn rules, the disciple, someone who's willing to follow because they value and truly believe deeply in whatever the teachings are. Sag.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been very throughout my life, I've had other periods of being very deeply religious. My problem is that I can't just leave a religion alone. I have to like dig and dig and dig and dig, and then I'm just like, "Oh no, I don't like this guy in the religion. That's it. I'm over." Like, that's me. Like, I ruin everything for myself. Like, but before I ruined it, I could be very devout and very like, yeah, like, I'll be like a monk for a religion. I used to not wear any makeup. Whenever you talked about your being vegetarian, like, I've done that for spiritual purposes. To me, that's also very Mars Neptune, because it's like it's your physical energy, your body, and you're doing something compassionate with your body, which we can all do. There's 3 times a day, unless you eat more meals, that we could be compassionate, right? And so I've had periods of that because I am so serious about something that I believe in, and I've had long stretches of time doing that. But I think it's my ninth house is in Virgo, so I have the South Node there, and so I dig and I want to research everything about the religion. And if something doesn't check out, like, can you imagine, like, who am I to like see if a religion checks out? Like, it's just so rude and disrespectful, but it's my personality. Like, I have to buy into the religion wholeheartedly, completely, or I can't do it. So that's why I'm not religious right now.
Man, that's the thing I love about Capricorn that I really want to embrace is that you guys are just so, you guys are down for the cause, but like whatever the cause is, you will work hard. You will put in the hours. Um, and that in itself is so valuable, just having that sort of industriousness and that sort of earnestness when you're involved in something. And so I think that's such a special value in itself. Like you should be someone who, you know, dives deep and makes sure that everything checks out because you're
Mhm.
so valuable and you're so talented, but not even like, oh, your talents are your value. You yourself are just so wonderfully valuable that you deserve that. Why should you be bamboozled by anything?
Yeah. I will not be bamboozled, Ruby. Like, there's one thing I won't be, and that's bamboozled. Like, I'm always convinced that everything's a pyramid scheme. I'm just like, how is this not a? I'm just like, I'm always checking for pyramid schemes, and that's just my personality. So that's the spirit that I bring. I'm a bit of a not a bit. I'm a big skeptic. So that is I approach everything with trepidation, but once you get me, like I'm sold and I'll be very diligent and I'll like yeah, as I said, like I didn't used to I was very like traditional, like Pentecostal for a while, and I wore the long skirts, and I've loved astrology since I was a child. And I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with like the Pentecostal like view of Christianity, but
Yeah,
I
I was
yeah.
raised, well, I guess half Pentecostal, half Catholic. So I feel you.
Okay. Well, so I went there and like astrology's the devil, and I've loved astrology since I was a child. So I had to put that away. Like my love for my mom also loved astrology. Like so I had to like not do that and not engage in that. And I wore the long skirts and I didn't wear makeup and just and during that time I also that's when I was vegetarian. And then when I went into Buddhism, that's when I was like, no, now I'm gonna be vegan and all like I love when your spiritual practice is holistic. Like it wasn't just like, oh, I go to church and no, I was reading the Bible, I was praying, and it translated into the way that I behaved in the world. Like, so I was like, no, how am I going to eat animals if I'm just like, I want to be like Jesus. And everything. Like, I get obsessed with something and I just haven't found my obsession right now is astrology, So if I found a religion or a spiritual path that gave me that, then I would do it. I would do it again. So
Okay, so if I was someone who approached you for a natal chart reading and you saw that I had Mars squaring Neptune in my birth chart, what would you tell me about that aspect?
I would tell you that, first of all, I would say that I understand that sometimes getting yourself going and going after the things that you want can be a little more complicated than it would be for the average person because you're combining two elements, two symbols astrologically that don't have very much in common. So you're combining the symbol Neptune of transcendence and spirituality and dreams and everything that is ethereal with the principle of like assertion and aggression and forward movement, right? Which is very much, it's like a point. Aries and Mars, my Mars is in Aries, is very much like it's an arrow that is moving and piercing. And Neptune is something that represents everything melting together. And it's quite opposite from like an arrow piercing everything. So you're combining two things that are difficult to bring together, but when you do manage to bring those things together, you can create things that are very inspired and are able to inspire other people. So, and when you are a Neptune person, inspiring others, it's kind of like it feeds you. That's the reason I am so positive about other people because it's not just like, oh, I'm a good person, so I'm going to be positive. No, it's that when somebody is, I get secondhand joy from other people's joy when they're exerting their Mars function out in the world. So like seeing you and what you're doing, it reminds me that I can do as well. So that's why it's just very like it's contagious for me. So that's why I'm so positive about people doing things because it makes me feel like I can do things. And inspiration is a very important thing for Neptune individuals and Pisces people as well. If we're using the 12-letter alphabet, which if we're trying to simplify astrology, which is one of my life goals, then we maybe should. So yeah, all Neptune people really benefit a lot from inspiration, giving it and receiving it. So that's what I would say.
Okay, I hear you. That's good. Thank you for sharing. So then I am also curious about, I guess, your own perspective on how having this aspect shows up in your life. And I'm going to ask a double-barreled question here, but how it shows up in your life, like when you were younger, childhood, teenage versus now when you're an adult.
So this is something that I never really thought about in the past, but if we're being transparent, we're talking about how I'm dealing with these Neptune issues, right? Because it has its virtues and it also has like its struggles, right? And one of my big struggles is boundaries, as we were talking about before we got on here. And I recently decided that I'm a grown ass lady. I'm 35 years old. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to sign up for therapy and I'm going to go every week and I'm going to pay for it. So I'm a Capricorn rising. So, if I'm paying for something, I'm taking it seriously. So we're talking about boundaries, and I never would have stopped to think about where this comes from, like this struggle with boundaries. And when I was a child, I lived in a family where very much other people, like I grew up with sick people. Like my father was sick and my grandmother was elderly and sick, and that was like my little family. It was my mom and me, my dad and my grandma, and everyone was sick, and my mom was so busy taking care of the things that needed to be done. So I was a child, and children usually have like a lot of needs, and like they can have a tantrum, or they need attention, but I didn't have the luxury of being able to do that because I could see that like my grandmother, who I love so much, like she was sick. So like I wasn't going to have a tantrum. Like my grandmother needs attention because she's ill. So it was that, and my mom being so busy that she couldn't maybe allow for me to have the freedom, like Aries, Mars freedom to play and do the things that a child might have wanted to do, because there was this overwhelming need to care for other people who really needed her attention. And so I very much thwarted my own desires as a child because I had to, because I had compassion for the people around me. Children are very compassionate. They see other people suffering, and like little babies, like they'll see somebody sad and like sometimes they'll cry, like
Yeah.
so yeah, so it's like I saw people around me suffering, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna you know be a team player, and so that's how it was when I was a child, and I never would have realized that that's where that comes from, because having healthy boundaries as a child would have been like, no mom, like I need your attention now, or like, hey, no, I need this, I need to go to softball practice or whatever it is, right? So but I didn't have that because the overwhelming need for compassion was there. And so then, as now that I'm older, these people don't need my compassion. It's all these people around me just like want to hang out, and like nobody's sick. Nobody needs me to take care of them. They just want to hang out with me because they enjoy my company. And so they'll try to like just like, hey Denise, like what's going on? Do you want to hang out? And I'm so like, oh, I don't want to reject them. Okay, I'll hang out. And so I never get done the things that I need to get done because I struggle with boundaries. So what I'm doing to really first was like realizing that I had this issue because I never saw it as an issue before. I was just like, no, I'm just like, I'm a good person. I let other people be seen and stuff, but it was getting in the way of me doing the things that I want to do. And I'm a grown ass lady now. So it's time to like, you know, take the reins of my life and take it back. So that's what I've been doing.
Mm. Um, mm. As you were sharing, I was thinking about I guess what you were saying about that sort of compassion piece. It's cool because I think so many of us have seen this, but like everywhere around the world, um, I think people are like suffering in unique way. Not maybe, well, they are unique, but it feels like there's a bit more of a heavier kind of gloom, you know?
Mhm, mhm.
Um, and it's funny because then what you were saying about how when you were younger, there were people who needed certain needs to be attended to by your mom. Um, it feels like even now as you're older, these friends who are coming to you, maybe they can pick up on a vibe of nurturing sustenance, like follower of Dionysus, got something to give,
Mhm.
which you do, no doubt.
Mhm.
Um, and so maybe like they're feeling like kind of downtrodden with whatever is happening in their life, but it's all internal. So what would you say about what um Mars represents, generally speaking, what the square represents, and what Neptune represents.
Okay, so the important there that we haven't talked about, which would be the most confusing thing for a person, I would think, is that the square is just the relationship, the kind of conversation that the two planets are having. So Mars, as we said, it's like the self-directed will. It is our direction, our passion moving forward. It has a lot to do with movement. And Neptune is more to do with dissolving boundaries, dissolving just like the boundaries between everyone and everything. It's the wholeness of like of spirit essentially. And so these two things have nothing in common. And so essentially what a square is two mismatched energies because they're 90 degrees away, and when they're 90 degrees away it means that there's a mismatch, but because they're linked, because they're at the same degree. So I have the Mars at 9 degrees of Aries and the Neptune at 9 degrees of Capricorn. So when you see the 9 9 cardinal, right, that means that that's a square. So it's two mismatched energies that are forced to function together, and it brings about a lot of struggle and it's heavy. And so I really like the reason why I like traditional astrology is because there's a lot of symbolism that is very useful, and I like practicality. So I like that the way that they separate the signs will kind of tell you about aspects. So a square is of the nature of Mars. So for those purposes, so like a square essentially requires a lot of like effort because Mars is like an effortful sort of symbol and energy. So through effort, you're going to have to find a way of making those energies that are mismatched. You have to find a way of making them work together.
Mm. It's funny, as you were speaking, I was thinking about the meaning of your name, or one of the meanings, follower of Dionysus, and that link to vegetation, wine, abundance, and Jupiter. Because when you said 9 9, when I think about 9 and 9, right, I think
Yeah.
with compassion, being
Mhm.
a helper to people in society. And so, giving and sharing and that kind of healing kind of energy um,
Mhm.
through this Mars square Neptune. Um, when I was first sort of researching this for myself, because I don't have a Mars square Neptune, but I've got a Mars Neptune opposition. But I found out that work that's suggested for people with that is becoming like a paramedic, something where it's like high intensity.
Yeah. Oh, you want to see me like it's really funny because um I don't know, but if somebody is in need, like don't even I'm going like I don't even think, and I'm not this is not a flex because I'm a very fearful lady. Like I don't speed, I've never had a ticket in my life. Like I'm a very careful, cautious individual, but if there is somebody in need of help, I'm not even waiting for anybody to direct me. I'm going. Like that is it's just something innate, and I've done this throughout my life, and later on I'm just like, whoa, that was pretty dangerous and maybe not safe, but it's just something that comes out of me. So doing it in a way that would be like with some training, with some guidance of like some systems and rules, that would be a very satisfying career for Mars Neptune people. Yeah. And but I can't help myself. I just if it's for somebody else, I will like go, especially if they're in danger or they're being hurt or anything, just something comes over me. Like I've I'll get into fights with people. Like I got into a fight with this man who had his dog in his car, in his hot car. And I was about to just break the window, but he came in time. I mean, good for him. But like in an altercation in a parking lot, like that's so dangerous. Like I tell myself now, I'm just like, Denise, you live in Texas. People have guns here. Like, but in the moment, there was a chihuahua in need of help. Like, like that's how it works.
With my Mars Neptune opposition, I don't think it really functioned like that when I was like a kid. Um, so
Yeah.
what is the square about in contrast to that?
So the square, so the opposition feels more like it's coming from the outside, and the square is more like you're moving with it all the time and it just bothers you. Like it is an uncomfortable thing that like I want to do these things, but I feel guilt. Or I want to do these things, but I'm going to be concerned with other people and what they need. And that's not really how the Mars function is supposed to operate. It's supposed to be like self-directed, not let's make sure everybody's okay and then we'll move. Like, as opposed to, in those instances where you have to rescue somebody, you're not thinking about like, oh, is my husband going to be upset that I'm arguing with this man in a parking lot? No, the chihuahua needs me right now, So it's like in those moments of clarity where there's somebody who is suffering who really needs you, that's where it's like very clear for a Mars Neptune person what they need to do. But I guess like the thing that we're supposed to learn as Mars Neptune people is that we can be that person that really needs us, that needs us to move and do that thing that needs to be done for ourselves. So that's what we are learning on the journey of self-actualization, I think.
Oh, that's very beautiful. Yeah, on the journey of self-actualization.
Mm-hmm.
You sound like someone who you sound like someone who's got a great head on your shoulders. After school special.
Yeah.
But so are you someone who, I mean, it very much sounds like you're a bit of like a student of life, like you're always trying to grow and progress in terms of your experiences with like yourself,
Mm-hmm.
never wanting to be stagnant, always wanting to dive deeper into the experience of yourself. Um, so when it comes to that, I'm thinking about spirituality. You even said, I think it was in our conversation prior to this, but you referred to spirit or source. Um, and so I'm curious about, like, I feel like that Mars energy would do something to create a sort of initiative, a sort of initiatory drive internally to delve deeper into understanding yourself in relation to spirituality, is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. I and you're just like you have a good head on your shoulders, Denise. You're always learning. I am, ma'am, but at the I do, however, I do feel a little bit like like those little wind up cars that like you just wind them up and then they go and then they flip over and their little tires are just spinning. That's me. So it's just like I know where I should be going. I know what I should be doing, but the Mars Neptune is a struggle, which is why I'm in therapy now and having people hold me accountable to these boundaries so that I could use, because I am a very energetic person, but I tend to squander my energy on things that aren't going to be like fruitful for me. So that's what I'm trying to like focus now on. But to come back to the spirituality thing, I think that the reason why spirituality has been more difficult for me is because I'm a fire person. I'm a very active person. And you're a very water person. So I feel that the spirit realm comes very easily to water people because you guys are just like constantly like sucking the spirit out of everything. Like you guys are like, yes, give it to me. And as a fire person, I'm just like, no, I want to move. I want to do things. Like I'm constantly wanting to do something. And the way that I've sort of tricked myself accidentally into practicing spirituality has been through yoga. And uh, I really like Ashtanga yoga is my favorite. And that is how you can get me to meditate, how to connect with source, how just everything.
I'm someone who's a vegetarian,
Mhm.
and I've been that for like 6 years. But the way that I came into being a vegetarian was very interesting because, like I was telling you before, like I spent the first 18 years of my life not feeling like I had any emotions whatsoever. Like I was like, "Oh, I'm a robot and I'm okay with that." Until people started calling me a robot. I was like, I'm not a robot. Why are you guys calling?
Yeah, only I could say it.
Only I can say it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was happening. But then when I got into high school, I started to care a lot about the way that I looked. It was really important for me to, try to, like high schoolers, teenage girls, like you want to be
Mhm.
cute.
Mhm.
And so I was doing a lot of focus on that. Um, but that was actually weirdly useful for me. Oh, there we go. Because like it got me to, for the first time, start looking at myself. There's very much this sort of dynamic, like you were saying, with oppositions. And I think, and Uranus too, right? Uranus is a signifier of groups, of chaos, of embarrassment, right? And so I experienced a lot of my school and relationship with people in that kind of way. Not always, but it was definitely there. And so when I started to harness the sort of Venus energy, wanting to tend to the skin, tend to the hair, work with what I had, and try and make it,
Mhm.
whatever it could be, um, I saw improvements that I was happy with. And I felt better. I was like, okay, great. So then I was like, okay, awesome. So then I started to ask myself questions about my muscles. I was like, well, maybe I can make myself stronger. So then I started going to the gym. So using that Mars, which is really cool, Neptune as well, right?
Mhm.
I guess illusions almost. And my Venus and Mars
Yeah.
are conjunct anyways.
Mhm.
So in doing that, the strength starts coming. And I was okay, great. And then I was eating like chicken one day. My mom had like made chicken homemade. Okay. And for the first time in my life, I really was like, this just tastes weird. I don't really like this. Like, there's just something off about it. It's not like it gave me food poisoning or anything, but there's just something that I felt was weird about it. So I transitioned from this space of not really connecting to how I was feeling to starting to be able to pick up to whatever it is that my body was trying to share with me. And so I was working retail. I worked like 12, 14-hour days. So I was like, whatever, I'm just going to give up chicken because I don't like it. What's the point of eating it? And I started buying these little salads or salad boxes, like spring mix,
Mhm.
take it home, rinse the leaves. And then I would put all of these different things inside of it. So just load it up. And I take my ranch dressing that made everything taste so good.
Of
Um,
course.
right? That's all you need.
Mhm.
I would go to work, I would eat that on my lunch, and like these 12 to 14-hour shifts, I would be fine. I would be thriving. It was like this for 3 months. Um, and then eventually a woman came into the store and she was speaking about spirituality. She was on her way to do this retreat kind of thing that she'd been working up to for the last 5 years. And then that's how I found out about meditation. And so, anyways, with me doing this research, I was looking at this sort of trail and I always thought it kind of started with the food, but I saw that it really started with that Venus Mars conjunction. Um, and it was like quite literally from the outside working inwards. And I started off not being able to feel anything at all. Um, but then becoming someone who's very sensitive and intuitive. But it sucked because I was like literally like, you couldn't take me anywhere. I would just start crying. No one said anything mean. I didn't feel offended. I would just start crying because of all this like
Needed
unsuppressed.
to come out.
I just needed to, so I would just leak everywhere. And I was like, I'd have to let people know. I'm like, I'm so sorry. This is so embarrassing. You're fine. But because what else to do? Um, yeah, that was my long-winded story because of your reflection. And I thought it was really, really wonderful. So I thought I'd also share that.
I think you said something really important that I think we should mention because it's the second time I hear it this week, and you're saying it the way that I believe to be true. Like, you didn't start from the inside and go out, because I think that erroneously sometimes people believe like, no, you need to get to the source on the inside and like then you will heal on the outside. And I'm just like, well, Ruby just told you that she started on the outside and it traveled all the way in somehow. And and I think that comes from your Virgo too. Like, it comes from the earth, because there are people that are too focused on the emotional side of healing, where they're just like, no, you just need to attend to your heart and your memories and all of that. And even though I think that that is important and true, I think that for some people in particular, going through the motions will eventually take you to a place where you feel good enough to heal on the inside. And I think that that's how it's happened for me. And I don't think that my experience and yours should be like just discredited, because it's kind of like overwhelming, especially in the spiritual community where they focus a lot on the internal things. And I think that the internal thing, obviously all of the parts are important, but sometimes action will later on allow for the more like nuanced things that are going on inside of you to have an opportunity to be healed through all the work that you're doing. So I think that it's very important. to not neglect the outer things either.
Mm. When it comes to working with these aspects, focusing on healing these aspects, um, how important is it to even be able to recognize that you have the aspect? Um, Better question. What's your experience with taking that first step with your Mars square Neptune? What does that first step look like for you?
I think that the first step, which I always try to leave people with, is that I want you, because I've told you my perspective of what the Mars square Neptune is, and I want you to read a lot of perspectives and take apart the symbols, but then I want you to tell me in your words and in your life how has it played out. So become so familiar with it, with what it means, and then you'll start seeing it. You'll start seeing like, oh, like this is where my boundaries fall apart. This is where I stop myself from doing something that I really want to do because I feel sorry for myself, or this is where I let people push me around, etc. You'll start to see it, because if you don't have the words for what's going on, then how can you identify what the problem is? So I think that just first acknowledging that it's a thing and being very familiar with it, and then slowly like identifying how it plays out in your life. I think it's very important. It's very important, in my opinion, also for astrologers not to dictate, this is what this means. I hate that. I'm just like, I'm telling you what this means for me. I'm telling you how I've seen it, but I want you to tell me, how does it play out for you, and for you to see it in yourself, because everything is so personal. So, yeah.
You reminded me of this wonderful story that I got to read. And basically, it's this man, he's Indian. I think he was Sikh. Um, and so, of course, he had, well, not of course, but he has a turban.
Mhm.
And there's like a little child. Um, and I think he's like mending something. And the child's asking him these different questions. And so he explains how, yes, because he keeps the needle in his turban and he keeps the scissors below his feet, like he's kind of stepping on them as he's sitting there. And so the child seeing him, take out this, da 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 da, this whole game he's playing, moving his body, getting these different items. And the kid's like, okay, so like, why are you doing that? Why don't you just put the needle on the table? You put the scissors on the table. Okay, let's live a simple life. But he was explaining how anything that is used to bring things together is elevated. It should be revered and appreciated. And so he keeps it at the top in his turban. And then anything that's used to cut, tear things apart, that's something, I don't think this was the word, but like controlled, something that you should,
Beneath your feet.
yeah, like something to contain. So you do that with your feet. And he was explaining this beautiful symbiosis of creation energy, sustaining energy by being the one to sow, and the destruction energy. But all of them are so necessary and valuable. Um, well, it's just about how we use those things and how we take care of those things. Um, and it just came to mind when you were speaking about Mars, um, and your father, and like, oh, I never thought about my dad being a Marine, Mars, Neptune. Um, or I guess for you, it'd be Mars, Jupiter, but you dabble. Yeah, it
Mhm.
made me think about the story, so I wanted to share it before I forgot.
I think that's such an important point from that story. I'll never forget it, because I think I said this at the beginning, like I think that there's a lot of, like, we should not ignore our darker side and our, some of us are violent people, and I've always thought that, like, we, especially, depends what society you're growing up in, but it's just like, oh no, that's bad, like you can't be violent. But I'm just like, what are you talking about? If somebody comes into my house and I need to protect you better believe I'm going to be violent. Sometimes there's a need for that. And I think that especially in the spiritual community, there is this emphasis on the light. And I guess it's because, we're suffering, right? And so people want to offer us, like a light in the darkness, right? But I think that especially for people who have these darker things inside of them, or an emphasis on just more of aggressive energy within them, it could feel kind of like we're being told that that's not good. But the guy had the scissors. He was just saying it needs to be, there has to be something containing it. You can't, he didn't put them up here in his turban. That was for the needle to mend things, right? But that doesn't mean that the scissors aren't important. Like both things are important because there's a time for everything. And there's a need for people who we need those people that are aggressive, those people that are dark and bad, right? For whatever reason, God made all of us. God made everything, right? He didn't just make lightness. So I think that it's something that we should all remember, and also remember that part about that parable, that story, that it was contained. It was beneath the foot. It wasn't just sitting there. It wasn't on the table. It wasn't in the turban. It was beneath the foot. So you gotta keep your foot on that. Like don't just have it out all the time, just with your scissors out. But there's a role for those scissors in the world, and I think that's a really important thing to remember.
Such a cool point, all of it that you shared, anyways. But yeah, there were so many different points that I was connecting with. Um, One that I really appreciated just now was what you were saying about God and like creation, um, that there's a meaning, a meaningful part for each soul, each creation to play. Um, and it's so interesting too, because that act of creation, it's something that continues with us, follows us throughout our lives, because like we're using it every time. Um, and how the more that we are creating, the more that we are like creating ourselves. So we're all made in God's image. So all the beautiful stuff, great. We've inherited that. But then through my own actions, through the seeds that I plant, I get to decide how much of my virtues and which virtues I want to display at which times versus how much of the dysfunction, the fear, the anxiety, all those things I want to display at which time. And then, it creates all these sort of karmas and these trees of action over so many, I believe in reincarnation, so over so many lifetimes. Um, yeah, but then that's where, wow, you know what? You are just such a lovely soul, because it's so important to have souls like you in our world, the Mars square Neptune, because you're able to see both sides of it, aren't you? Like what you were saying about a lot of people, we don't really think that way, in that violence, physical violence, it's something that we've had to use force, right, throughout our lifetimes. You can't just try and put it in the closet and pretend that everything that has to do with violence is chaotic and bad, because it's a necessary thing. It will never not be part of um, our stories, our journeys, when it comes to the lives that we're living right now. But then, because you've got that beautiful Neptune, and it makes me think about your father, Venus and Pisces. You were saying, like when you think about Venus and Pisces, my goodness, how beautiful, just as an individual. And his having to go through that war experience and then dealing with the fallout of that. It's so unique to have someone who embodies taking in such extremes of both energies. And it's so necessary.
Mm-hmm. It is, man. Like, because I always give like this terrible example, but of course I'm gonna do it because this is what I always do, put my foot in my mouth. But it's just like, like um we are so divided as a people in America, and people are always just like, um I'm all about embracing everybody, even the people who think the dumbest things. I'm just like, I love you, buddy. Yes, go ahead, think whatever you want to think, like it's fine. I think we should accept everyone without exception. And there are people who are more tend towards aggressiveness, and we, the love and light people, we're just like, love and light, we need to love. But sometimes some aggressor is going to come from outside, and who's going to go fight that aggressor? Because the love and light people are not going to take up arms, We're going to need those aggressive people to protect us from the other ones who might harm us. So there's a place for all of us, like it's like in nature. You have bunnies, and then you have wolves, and you have lions, and you have a gazelle. Like there's a role for everyone. And I think that if we just realize that and learn to appreciate, maybe it's accepting the darkness within ourselves that will allow us to accept it in others. But I think that it's when people deny that within themselves, like that I have like this ugly characteristic, we just want to cover it and just be like, no, 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 like I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. And when we're like that, then when we see other people's like ugliness, we're like, that's bad, that person is bad, I don't want to be like that person. That person is different from me. But I'm very keenly aware of like my dysfunctions and the mistakes that I've made. And I've been aggressive at times when later on I'm just like, oh my goodness, like that was so aggressive, Denise. That's embarrassing. Like, oh my Lord. But I'm just like, you know what? I, oh well, like I made a mistake, and I forgive myself. And that's why it's so easy for me to forgive others and to forgive the the flaws that I see in other people. So that's what makes me such a like accepting person. But it's because I'm myself flawed, and I'm not trying to be perfect either. So that's why I'm just trying to do better. And I think that that's what all of us should like strive for. Just do better, man. Like you're not trying to be perfect, like, and some people really want like to be perfect. Some people really do. And I think that's a really difficult prison to put yourself in. Like,
Something in what you were sharing, it was nice because it really made me think about, I know we're not speaking about Chiron in this episode, but it did feel very chironic, very healing and like feeling what you were saying about like the anger, and it reminded me about this lovely program that I watched. Actually, it's a podcast. Mayim, I forgot her last name, but the Big Bang lady,
yeah, the science lady. Yeah, yeah. Who's a real doctor. Yeah.
like a real doctor. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
not an actress. She is, but real doctor.
Mhm.
And on her podcast, she interviewed someone who had actually had a near-death experience. And, coming back from that, um, it was just such a beautiful episode. I encourage anyone to go and watch it. It was really, 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 really good. Um, but at the end, um, in the interview, what was said was about trauma and how the wound of trauma, um, it can really be such a beautiful thing because um, through that gash, through that hole, somehow it gives us access to experiences that other people don't have access to. And then those souls who have experienced whatever, they can become the sort of, I guess, they can be endowed with special ways of thinking things, of understanding things, special abilities in relation to that wounding. Um, and it becomes this wonderful, I don't want to say vessel because it's such a woo kind of word, but it becomes this way, this pathway, this sort of guiding principle that other people can tap into um, to sort of help them with their own struggles. Um, yeah, and so when you were sharing all of that, it really reminded me of that moment in that episode. Mm.
I'm gonna go listen to it because I like the things that she shares. So I love hearing about near death experiences. It's really interesting stuff. Yeah.
Do you have any like comments or anything you'd like to share?
No, I think that I don't know if this is where you were going, but I think earlier when we finished the first one, you were like something about practical and the spiritual bringing them together. And I was like, that's something that I'm like kind of obsessed with. And not that I've figured it out in any magnificent way, but um I read a lot about through this Mars Neptune stuff. I read a lot about AA and how people have dealt with their addictions through spirituality, and even people who weren't necessarily spiritual. And I think it's the creator of the AA program, um, who said that like sometimes you're gonna have like a spiritual experience, like an awakening, and that's it. Like you never have to drink again, you never have to use at all, whatever your substance of choice is or your behavior of choices. But and that one transformative transcendent experience will heal you, but for other people they're not going to have that experience. And so it's all of these little tasks of going to the meetings, of having the little chip, of counting the days, of doing the work, you know, those people will be healed through that. And I think it's so beautiful to think about that, because that is the Pisces Virgo axis. Like that is the transcendent experience would be Pisces. But Virgo, which would people forget the spirituality of Virgo. There's spirituality in doing those rituals and those cleansing rituals, or just cleaning your house can be a ritual of cleansing, you know, it can be symbolic of that. And people forget that. They're just like, Pisces is the spiritual. I'm just like, it is, but you could also, there's spirituality in the everyday as well. And I think that that's a very important thing that we need to remind people about. Yeah.
You know, you've helped me so much in just that moment. You really put something together for me that I've actually been struggling with. And that was a great reminder, the spirituality in Virgo, and that it's through those sort of mundane, everyday, collecting the chips, little tasks. And eventually it will lead to that transcendent moment. And it doesn't have to look like the fancy dancy transcendent moments that other people have.
Yeah.
It's going to be you transcending something by transforming something.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that beautiful connection that you just shared.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what you would love is the Hallmark Hall of Fame series. There are these incredible films, and one of them is a film that shows the life of the creators of the AA system. Um,
Oh, let
it,
me write that down, Ruby. I don't want to forget.
okay, but I don't even know the title, though I forgot.
But
So,
still, I'll Google and I'm sure I could find it.
okay, perfect, because I think you would really like it. Hallmark Hall of Fame, and it's the story with the AA people. You would really, really appreciate that, I think.
It's really funny because it's just like I've never like used drugs in my life, but it's just like I've always like felt like that would be me. So I'm just like, so I read everything about that and I connect so much to that. So, and I think that they figured some stuff out. There's magic in their system, and we're just missing out because we're not into drugs, but we can take advantage of it nonetheless.
I totally feel you on that. I'm the same way. I've always felt like I'm not addicted to anything, but I've always felt that same thing. Like I could totally be on drugs. Like I could.
Yeah.
Oh
Like
my goodness.
it's either this or drugs. So like, yeah.
Totally. Uh,
Yeah.
oh man, there was so much more I wanted to say. Just getting too excited. And even just that Virgo in ninth house that you have, it really shows what you were saying, that value of the everyday, to create something bigger in terms of building faith and, you know, these beautiful spiritual things inside. And that's the funny thing about spirituality is that I think it sounds super fancy, but spirituality is just virtues, um, you know, and experiencing them every day, when you're remembering who you are and who your creator is and who you're blessed to be, you know?